was at BYU, Idaho, and one of the single greatest things that happened to me there was my exposure to operetta. I was cast as Frederick
Pirates of Penzance.
in Pirates of Penzance, and had a marvelous time. And I never seemed to finish at the institution I'd started at because I felt after a year there that I needed to do more, and auditioned at Arizona State University, among other places, and was very fortunate. Of course, nobody knows what they're doing at that age of 22 or something.
You guess and hope for the best. Yeah.
And Arizona State University turned out to be really quite amazing. At the time, it had the only music theater degree program, one of the only ones that I knew of, and possibly the only one in the United States. But they were heavy into performance. They had a dedicated theater space with a hydraulic pit, the works, a dedicated rehearsal space, a whole section, and their own scholarship students. Most of the students who sang for their lyric opera theater, LOT, did not even go down the hall, did not even go across the street to sing in a choir.
They stayed specifically within the program.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was that large. And very interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily healthy in terms of the singing art form, because we definitely, developed camps. But for 3 years, I didn't do anything but sing opera, operetta, and musical theater.
How many hours would you say per day you were singing at that point? Because I know what you taught us.
Right.
And I'm curious about what you did back then.
Well, and that's always the dilemma. The pedagogical textbooks, if they're any use, will tell you that the voice really shouldn't be used for more than an hour a day, hour and a half tops. Between lessons now, we weren't doing choral singing, but between lessons and movement classes and singing classes and acting and singing classes, and then daily rehearsals, I was probably singing, a couple hours a day, but it wasn't as demanding as choral singing. Because in choral singing, you're singing the whole time, whereas in a staged work, you sing and somebody else sings, and then you sing and somebody else sings.
If it's a good show, yes. I think we've both been in parts where we've had to play roles where you wind up singing a lot more than you probably should.
And that's where a singer needs to be wise. And understand that vocal directors of shows and choral directors, and I speak for myself, and I hope this speaks for everyone, we can't possibly be aware of the vocal condition of any of the people we're responsible for. So I trust them, and I tell them this to know when it's time to shut up, right? Because you don't ever want anyone to sing to the point of vocal strain.
Well, I had heard this interview a few years back. I think it was with Shoshana Bean, who's a Broadway singer. She was talking about how, when you do a recording cast, you're in the studio, you get all these multiple takes, you get multiple days, and you can do everything you want and get exactly the sound you want. And then you go and do it on stage, and you're doing 8 shows a week on Broadway. There's no way you can do that same thing you did in the recording
with
cast.
Matinees on the weekend.
Right. So she talked about how, she would give head voice or mix or whatever you want to call it to be able to hit the notes that the audience still needed to be able to hear. But because she was trained enough, she'd be able to say, I can do that in a way that they won't know the difference.
Did I ever tell you that story about the tenor who was singing the part of Jean Valjean on tour?
Okay.
When I was studying my doctorate at UNC, he had been hired to come in and sing Don José in their production of Carmen. And he gave a workshop. And he told his story about how he came to the lead role of Jean Valjean, and then he sang it for us. It confirmed what I'd been taught and understood. The Metropolitan Opera, in contrast, will never give consecutive performances. They will do 3 shows in a repertory style, and so that the singers that are cast in these, so like, on Monday they'll do Tosca, Tuesday Carmen, Wednesday Madame Butterfly, and then on Thursday they'll do Tosca again.
Okay.
To make sure that they have highly paid voices, very highly paid voices, have ample time for their voices to rest so that they're fresh. Because they realize that they're working with timeless voices. And so they prioritize the health of the singer. And because the music they're singing is so athletic, they're ensuring a failure if they're going to beat up the singers' voices by doing consecutive performances. It's it costs more. It's not as efficient, but it is in consideration of the singer. Whereas, going back to this story of the Jean Valjean guy, I don't even remember his name. Really nice guy. He received his contract. Chorus for Les Mis and understudy for Jean Valjean. He was like, yes, I'm the understudy. When he got to rehearsals, I think he said there are 8 other guys that had exactly the same contract.
So they would overbook it because of the difficulty?
Yes. And he soon realized why. The guy who was cast, as they were touring, lasted about a month, and then his voice crapped out. The next guy would take the role. The next guy, he was like number 4, 5, or 6. And he saw it coming like a deer in the headlights. And he said, I've got to figure out a way to do this so that I don't end up like those other guys. And he sang it, the whole thing in a mix.
Rather than singing.
Well, I'll show you what he did, if I can. So then he sang it for us. The leap is what, an E natural. God, I hear my prayer in my need. Sing the whole thing in a falsetto mix.
So
And not a very good one, honestly.
Even on an E, but because he can justify the acting and the emotion behind it.
Yeah, and he was amplified. I was sitting on like the front row and or the second row in this masterclass. I looked around like, he's cheating. He's cheating. That's how I felt. Hold on high, hear my prayer in my need. You have always been there. Anyway, take from that what you will. So, Arizona State, the best thing that did for me, it acclimated me to constant performance. While we were performing the first show of the year, the semester, we were auditioning for the second show. And in December, we were auditioning for the first show. And then we had performances in the summer, too. And it was a gig. It was a job. It was part of my scholarship. And the thing I loved about it, it was very thorough in terms of movement and in terms of being singer-actors, not just singers in costume. And the most beautiful thing for me was they didn't differentiate between opera, operetta, and Broadway musical theater. They taught, and I believe this is true to this day, it's the same skill set.
So rather than trying to differentiate, they were able to say,
and what they drilled into your head, if you want to work in the world today, you have to be able to do all of those styles.
That makes sense.
And so they didn't teach it as a different technique. It was just recognized as a difference in the musical styles. You use the same voice, you got the same tools, the same skill sets that you're applying to these different styles. And I needed that because first time I heard Luciano Pavarotti when I was 16, that's all I cared about. Nothing else was as good. I mean, growing up in rural Wyoming, we didn't have theaters and there was no internet, nothing like that. I heard this man sing and I began to buy everything I could get of him singing. So what was I listening to at age 16? In my living room in Cowley, Wyoming, I was listening to Pavarotti and Cheryl Milnes and Mireille Freni singing some of the best recordings ever.
Was this around the time of Placido as well?
Yes. I heard Placido and I thought he was terrible compared to Pavarotti. I love Pavarotti.
It's a different voice type too, isn't it?
It is slightly different. And I grew to appreciate what Domingo could bring to the art form. But what I'm trying to say is I was so obsessed with this voice of Pavarotti. That's all. I dreamt about the guy. I ushered at one of his concerts. I wanted to be the next Pavarotti. And Arizona State University helped me see the bigger picture. That there's more to singing than Pavarotti. more to the art form of singing and acting than Puccini. Even though he's still the apex for me, it ruined me.
Well, most of your posters in your office were Puccini posters.
Which I left there, by the way.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, what was I gonna do? Anyway, and to this day, Puccini is the apex of the great combination of these art forms, where the music and the drama go hand in hand. I remember I was a junior at Arizona State University, and I was doing a report. I was doing a musical dramatic analysis of Tosca. And my professor said, you might just want to choose one act. I'm like, really? And then I realized why. And as I really dug in, measure by measure, how the music was mated and married to the text and the drama, every note was significant. Every chord, every rhythm, the timing of everything. I try to describe it to people. When you listen to Puccini, you're listening essentially to film score. The music is so perfectly matched with the drama, amplifying the drama at every turn. Even the incidental music, which there isn't a lot in Puccini, there's no wasted music. There's a reason for every note that is written, and it's astonishing. Yeah, it was like ended up being a 20-page paper on one act.
How many acts are there in Tosca?
3 acts, and I think I just did the 3rd act. Mind-blowing. Well, that's education, right? Yeah. So, Arizona State University did at least 3 very good things for me. Number 1, it exposed me to the whole realm of singing and acting, not just opera, and gave me a newfound respect for that. Exposed me to other great voices than Luciano Pavarotti, and exposed me to a whole world of literature that wasn't about singing and acting. Art song repertoire, which my Warren Hoffer, may he rest in peace. He was so patient with me. I was such an idiot. Well, and there's a 4th thing, which leads to the pedagogical question you asked. He made a comment in one of my lessons one day, and I'm sure I was the most frustrating student, thinking I knew everything. And he made a comment that was so impactful to me in a way he didn't mean it to be, that it ultimately ended up being my doctoral dissertation and a landmark study on the voice. He was getting frustrated with me in lessons, which was pretty common. He was a very lyric tenor, and he loved these lyric art songs, and I was trying to sound like Pavarotti, and you can imagine how that was going in lessons. And all he was right, I was a natural-born lyric, and I was trying to sing dramatic. In any case, he said to me one day, "Dang it, Ken, you're not breathing right." And I tend to be mechanically minded, and my approach to singing and teaching singing is the same. Abstractions. He had more abstractions in his lessons than anybody I've ever met. He told me one day, "Ken, I want you to imagine while you're singing that you're drinking in the tone."
And that means...
I was the most confused student you'd ever seen. How do I drink and sing at the same time? I was so literal, right? Anyway. So when he said that to me, "Dang it, Ken, you're not breathing right," it occurred to me that every teacher I've ever had, every choral director I've ever sung under, talked about how breathing is the secret. It's a great secret to singing. And I thought, I'm paying for these lessons, so I sat down right in the middle of my lesson, and I said, "I want you to explain this to me. Show me some pictures. I want to know which muscles, because I don't know anatomically, physiologically, how it even works. I've been singing by the seat of my pants like most people do. Will you please explain this? Take the rest of my lesson. Please explain this to me." And his eyes were like this. And he said to me...
Because he had the answer, though, right?
He said to me, "You don't need to know all of that stuff."
Oh, no.
Quote, unquote. What I had unintentionally done was called his bluff. And it's not because he was a bad person. or a bad singer or a bad teacher. What I later found out, that, as you can tell, how many years later? 40 years later? 30 years later? That's still indelibly impressed in my mind what happened. A teacher telling me to do something, and the teacher themselves don't understand what they're asking me to do. Ultimately frustrating. I began that very day asking people, and I further deduced the question, what are the muscles responsible for expelling the breath? I would ask all the other teachers and medical professionals.
Yeah, at one point, didn't you say you went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor and asked them the same question?
I was at a pulmonology appointment, and on my way up, I was on the elevator with 2 respiratory therapists who should know everything about respiration.
Right.
And I had them quartered in the elevator. I looked at them and I said, so, what are the primary muscles of active exhalation? I had thought about it enough to that point to really identify what are the muscles for actively expelling the breath. And they looked at each other sheepishly, shrugged their shoulders, and went, I don't know, the abdominals, question mark? I'm like, how can this be?
So
in my naivete, I thought, well, the medical profession knows everything about the body.
when was this? Like what year maybe estimated?
That would have been 2001, 2002.
So not long enough ago that we should feel like it's okay that they didn't have the answer. They probably should have known at that point. They had enough evidence to be able to tell us what the answer was. Well,
what I found out, it wasn't their fault either. So when I finally entered my doctoral program, I said 2001. I've been alive a long time. 1997-ish.
It's only a few years difference. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I was still in South Dakota at the time. No, wait a minute. Because, yes, it's about, 1997-ish, I guess. So then I entered my doctoral program and chose the specific discipline of voice voice performance and pedagogy to help me answer this burning question.